And this book right here is starting a conversation that we're going to have right here on stage. I think there's going to be some lightning, because it's talking about the elite and the charade of changing the world. The elite and the charade of changing the world, this idea of constructs and who's empowering whom and who's holding on to power. Joining Anand and Ravi on stage is Michael Tubbs, who is a bad man, who I love. I call him Mr. Mayor. He's the mayor of Stockton, California. When he got elected, after overcoming some personal triumphs, he became the youngest and the first African-American mayor in Stockton history. And so when you get a chance, talk to him about his personal story, but he's going to talk about how he's bringing innovation, technology, philanthropy to Stockton to change the outcome in the lives of his constituents, his city members. So join them to the stage. Welcome to the stage, Ravi, Anand, Michael. Who needs a book? I got a book. I got a book. These books are available outside. They're free. Pick them up during the break. We're going to be signing them during lunch. Ravi, take it away.
All right. I want to just jump right into this conversation, and I'll start by framing it. A few years ago, I was invited for the first time ever to this forum called the Aspen Action Forum, and I would love to tell you more about it, but essentially, it's the opposite of what we try to do here at the Arena Summit. It was a invitation-only, super exclusive and expensive gathering of people who were millionaires and billionaires, and then a few, as Anand likes to say, people they allow to hang out with them, which at the time described me. And I went to the back of the room for I think it was the keynote. It was the top billed speech of the weekend, and this guy got up, who I had never met before, and took it to the entire room, telling them that the way that they viewed philanthropy, the way that they were convening that group, the names that were put on the buildings were extremely problematic. And that speech became the basis of Winners Take All. And so I wish we could talk more about that gathering, but we'll spare you for now. You should listen to the Ezra Klein podcast, where they spend about 5 minutes talking about some fun and challenging issues there. But what was the thesis and the point of that speech, and how did that turn into this larger work that is now available for all folks in this room?
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for being here. I love the energy of this room and this community, and it's the second time I'm here, and you guys are just such a fun group. I wrote this book because I actually think America right now is in the grips of two rival theories of change, of how you make change. There's the theory of this room, which is the theory I'm partial to, which is that you make change through politics and movements and law and policy, and you solve problems at the root and for everybody. When you see schools that don't work, you don't create one school in your town to which you donate some of your hedge fund money. You actually ask why public schools are underfunded and unequally funded, and you fix that. When you see women dropping out of the labor force, you don't tell them to lean in and raise their hand higher. You actually create the kind of family policies that allow women to play their many roles. But that theory, which I don't need to convince you of, unfortunately most rooms are not like this room in America today. And I actually think, although this room is steeped in that theory of how you make change, which is what I call real change, in the last 30, 40 years, in the same period that the right has waged a war on government, on the idea of government, on the idea of doing things together as a public, in that same period, they were also doing something else which is less well known. They were trying to steal our idea of how change works. Because if they had just discredited government and run away, it wouldn't have worked, right? People would have been bleeding out in the streets, and people would have been suffering, and people would have been, it turned on them as you did this. You made the taxes cut, you underfunded these programs, you called for people to not have health care unless they work 30 hours a week, and so every company therefore employs people 29 hours a week. You did this, and the right would have lost everything. So what did they do? The same business interests, but unfortunately now not only on the right. It started to spread to the left. The same people who had pushed for a winners-take-all society, who had pushed for business to be deregulated, who had pushed for rich people to pay less taxes on their carried interest than you pay. Those same people reinvented themselves as the solvers of the problems they caused. The people who architected the age of inequality recast themselves as the saviors from the age of inequality. They signed the Giving Pledge. They adopted charter schools and sat on their board. They talked about changing the world through their monopolistic Silicon Valley companies. They built a gig economy in which no one has security and no one has careers, and they told poor people that they are micro-entrepreneurs. They rich-splained to us that change was something that trickles down, like money was supposedly to do in the 80s. They pushed trickle-down change. And they have tried, I believe, to steal the idea of change, to steal our idea of change, so that we start to think that change is something billionaires give us when they're done raping and pillaging our economy. I'm sorry if I'm being direct, but you all look like you need to wake up a little bit with this morning time slot. And I believe that until we can, it's not just enough to end Trump. Although, trust me, nobody wants to end him faster than I can. But Trump, the story of Trump didn't begin with Trump. I think Trump is the culmination of an era of fake change. And, awkwardly, that era of fake change wasn't just Republicans and it wasn't just people on the right. A lot of people on the left, rich people, billionaires, saviors, people who maybe support causes like this, have also been peddling the idea that the world is saved by billionaires, by the people who cause the problems, that the people who have built our winners-take-all economy are our deliverance. And I think we can't just end the Trump era. We have to make the Trump era the end of the era of fake change and usher in what I call an age of reform.
And so, before we hear from Mayor Tubbs and what he's been up to, as quickly as you can, you have this theory in the book about what it means to act from generosity versus acting from justice. What do you mean by that?
Although they both start with the J sound, generosity and justice are actually not the same thing. And what a lot of rich people have tried to do in our time, after building the winners-take-all economy, after architecting an economy in which there's actually no way that most Americans could ever transcend their circumstances. By the way, the odds of getting ahead in America, out-earning your parents, have fallen in the course of many of the lifetimes of people in this room from 90% to 50%. We are a crapshoot nation when it comes to social mobility today. It's not who we think we are, but that's who we are. And so, what a lot of those folks have done is, having built that economy, they try to kind of convince us that, you know, well, our minds, our mentalities, we're good at spreadsheets, we're good at PowerPoints, we're good at, you know, we can go in and we're clever with data. And they have used that to colonize the space of change making, to redefine reform in winner-friendly ways. That's one of the most important points I want to leave you with. On every issue, whether it's the schools or women empowerment issue I mentioned or any other, there is real change at the root and for everybody, and then there's a light facsimile of change which gestures at change and seems to make you a good person while totally protecting the system that keeps you on top.
And so, Mayor Tubbs, I was reading recently a political article in which you pointed out that, you know, Stockton, a city that was forced into bankruptcy before you were mayor, was investing in things like, you know, the redevelopment of the marina, you know, so people could park their yachts there. And you made the point that it can't just be about image, we have to invest in people. And that's led you down this road that now brings us to this this major project that you have to invest in a universal basic income project in Stockton. And I think for those of us who are interested in changes coming from a place of justice, this seems like a really important step. Tell us a little bit about what's going on and what you hope to accomplish in 2019.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the points you raised. I think taking the frame that we live in a society where folks who have money have undue influence on political process, just being really pragmatic. For the past 2 years, I've made it my duty to build relationships to try to get to some of that justice, and using philanthropy to really seed crazy ideas with the hopes that one day they'll become policy. So one example of that is the basic income experiment. So essentially, in February, at least 100 families will be given $500 a month for 18 months as a basic income pilot. And what's fascinating is that we decided to do it at or below the area median income of $46,000, which means a lot of folks who are working and don't qualify for some benefits but still are struggling will also benefit. But I think in this case, philanthropy has been really helpful to really try and test an idea that people have been talking about since the agrarian revolution in the late 1700s, but now actually do it and see what happens. So when we think about kind of philanthropy and social change, I think the points raised are valid, in that we have to be very careful, in that it's not done on the terms of folks who kind of benefit from society as it is. But if there are ways to kind of generate or use some of the resources and money to really get to crazy ideas and solutions that lead us to justice and lead us to policy, then I think that's the way to go.
And so, in service of that, like ensuring that the work that you're doing is on the right terms, you brought citizens into the process in deciding how this money is used. Talk about that.
Yeah, so in June, we had 60 foundations from across the nation kick it with me in Stockton. We had a whole day of tours and panels and discussions, but I was very adamant in that I'm not an organization, so let's talk to our community-based organizations, let's talk to the folks on the ground. So we had the grandmothers, the organizers, and all the folks in the room kind of dictating where the money would go, and we did that because I realized, to your point, oftentimes folks would tell us what they wanted to give to. So my challenge to the foundations in the room was, well, believe in us. Let's invest in a place, and let's invest in a strategy that's collective impact, but comes from the folks who are most affected by said issues. So since the convening, we've had follow-ups, conversations, and meetings, but it's been really, really eye-opening, I think, for the community and also for the philanthropic community as well. For them, I think, to recognize that folks they can figure it out. They may not have fancy theory of changes, they might not have went to Yale or Harvard, but they're smart and they're their own experts in terms of what's needed. And again, I think that one of the points we've been making is that philanthropy and money is not a panacea. It's not going to solve all the ills of poverty and violence and educational attainment, but it helps. And it can help, especially if we marry that with a policy agenda. So you marry programs and policy, and I think that's the way to get to the real change you talk about in your book.
Can I ask you, so one of the curiosities I have about this, because I think what you're doing is very admirable. Unlike a lot of these efforts, if you think about Mark Zuckerberg, he went to, Oprah to announce to the people of Newark that he was about to save them, a city he'd never visited before deciding to save them, and TLDR, it didn't work. $100 million vanished without any change. You have clearly tried to do something different by having rich people don't get to decide what the policies in Stockton are. You decide what the policies are locally, and they can pick and choose. But I have a question about how you navigate a couple things. Because a lot of these rich folks, to Ravi's earlier question, they love the idea of their own generosity. They don't like the idea of being brought to justice, or maybe living in a more just system. They love being told to do more good, and they're happy to, but they don't like doing less harm. They like giving more, but they don't like taking less. So when those folks get on that bus and get out of that bus, I don't know the backgrounds of them specifically. I assume some of them made their money in finance and pushed for a tax system that makes it very hard to run Stockton, as you would probably want to. I imagine some of them are part of the automation economy that makes it hard to get work in Stockton. I wonder how you navigate the complicity, the ongoing complicity of the very people who are helping and chipping in with their role in making things better. Do you feel like you can speak truth to them? Do you feel like you lose the right to speak truth to them when you get their help?
Well, I'm a little crazy, so I speak to everyone how I speak to everyone. So I think but it depends on what we're talking about, right? So if they're on the tour and we're trying to get investment in Stockton, I probably won't spend an extraordinary amount of time about all the ways you're complicit. Probably focus.
That's why I'm not the mayor of anything.
But I will focus a lot of my energy and attention around sort of how to be part of a solution. But we always speak in terms of root causes. So, for example, when I was on city council, Wells Fargo was doing a lot with like 100,000 here, 100,000 here for things. But I would always say this is great because of this foreclosure crisis where it's subprime lending. So I think there's a way to finesse it where they get the point, but you're not necessarily prodding and poking. But luckily for us, a lot of our investments thus far have come from institutional, like some foundations and folks like that, and not as much from kind of individuals. But, okay, keep talking?
Make the plug, yeah,
okay.
Get the individuals.
So, but I think one good example of this is Chris Hughes from the Economic Security Project. So the Basic Income Pilot is funded by the Economic Security Project, which was co-founded by Chris Hughes, who's one of the co-founders of Facebook. But I think the way—
one of the slightly more decent co-founders.
And I don't know Mark, so I can't speak to that, but Chris is a good guy. But I would say I've been impressed with how he speaks unapologetically about how, like, I got lucky, Mark was my freshman roommate, and that's why I'm wealthy. And because of that, we have to do something to make it so folks don't have the economic floor go out from under them. And that's where the funding for our basic income pilot comes, but it's been super refreshing because it just came with funding and that's it. So all the decisions, selection criterion, researchers, narrative, talking points come from the community. And I think he's not a perfect example, but I think a better example of kind of using your resources to get to real change and using your philanthropy to get at policy versus just programs.
And so I think in starting to score this on, is this on the generosity side or the justice side, part of it is what kind of conversation we have while the project is going on, but then there's this other conversation around what's the end goal and what is the end result and who wins and loses. And so what is the best case scenario? You know, if this pilot works, what does the world look like and who wins and loses from that?
Well, best case scenario will be 300,000 people in Stockton come to city council and say, we want this for everyone. And then the millions of people in California say, we want this in California. And then the hundreds of millions of people in the United States say, we deserve this in the country. So to answer your question, the best case scenario is seeing that it works or that it's helpful, and there's a public demand for us to kind of think of through kind of policy and scale to make it happen for everyone.
I think one of the two things that your comments raised for me that I think are so important for everybody in this room who thinks about how do you make change. I think there's a kind of threat and an opportunity, to put it simple. I think the threat is everyone in this room and so many people before us have worked so hard for the idea of one person, one vote, right? And by the way, that issue is not over yet in American life, as we know. It'll be probably a perpetual issue. And one of the concerns I have, even when the money wasn't predatory, even when it wasn't foreclosure money, even if it's a noble foundation, one of the concerns that I just had writing this book is, why do we devote so much energy to making sure we have one person, one vote, while we are creating a tax-subsidized, essentially fourth branch of government, which is philanthropic spending, that is the opposite of one person, one vote, in which none of us have a vote, in which they sit on our school boards and they sit on our health policy things. And it's $410 billion a year in philanthropic spending, which is getting to the level of federal non-military, non-discretionary spending. The opportunity raised by what you're doing that I think is very exciting is a lot of the givers right now, these private givers and billionaire saviors, want to remain outside of government. They don't want to do what you're doing. They actually want to hear from people as little as possible, which is why they announce things with Oprah instead of the people they're helping. And a lot of what happened in the middle of the 20th century, and Head Start's the best example, was philanthropists playing in the mud by themselves privately, testing things that worked without government breathing down their neck, without shareholders, and then when they proved it, going to government and saying, okay, make this policy and do it through taxation and do it through the system. And that idea has fallen out of fashion today, and I think you are leading an experiment on bringing that back. The marriage of bringing some of this private money and private giving into the channels of public policy so people fundamentally are still shaping it.
I think, one thing, Anand, that you both raised in the speech and in your book is this metaphor of the starfish. And to paraphrase probably horribly, there's this, and I'm a former charter school leader, by the way, so I'm in the hot seat with Tubbs here. Thank you, Stacy. And so this hits me close to home too, a lot of the arguments that you make. And when you first made the starfish metaphor, which is, if you're walking on the beach, you see a bunch of starfish, there's this, we used to actually say this in the Reform community, if you can just throw one starfish back in the sea, you've done a lot of good. And the sort of point with Reform is, I and people like Stacey Shells and others, Will Packer in the room, folks who've been involved in the charter school community, we're not billionaires. Like, what we're trying to do is get as close to the problem as we can, and if Stacey were to wait for government to let her be a principal, she'd be 90 years old probably, and knowing how blunt Stacey is, she might never get there. So part of what we're dealing with is we both have the relationship with philanthropy, and I imagine this is true of Mayor Tubbs as well, is like, there's an issue of like, getting the money, but then there's the issue of, even if you took the money incentive outside of it, of trying to get to the problem fast. And one of the issues that we have dealt with in Reform, and I imagine this is true of universal basic income, is that it's also really hard to find solutions that can move fast for the people, the 1 in 4 people living in poverty in Stockton, or the kids who we try to serve who, it's urgent for them to be able to read and have a great school. So how do you think about the question of speed of the solution and just the nimbleness of government to solve some of these problems that we have?
That starfish story is so powerful, and it's interesting that it's become such a touchstone story in many social change circles. By the way, there's an original version of the story there by Lauren Isley, and this story actually does not contain the moment where one person throws one starfish back and the other says, "Why? What difference does it make?" And he says, "It makes a difference to that one." That version of the story that's so famous is a total made-up adaptation that has spread in this community, even though it wasn't in the original story, which is interesting. So why does it appeal to us? Why did we make up that, right? And what I would say is, and I spent a lot of time in this book with people attempting to crack that problem. The idea is never to not throw the starfish back.
Right.
It's a not only, but also.
Right.
Right? And I think the interesting question, so yeah, throw the starfish back, help the kids you can help, give money to families who can give money now. But I think the interesting question is, how do you use that, the small experiment you're doing, to force systemic reform? And that may be storytelling, that may be strategic shaming. I'm in the middle of writing a piece about LeBron School in Akron, which I just went to. There's one version where that's just an amazing, amazing school, and it really helps a lot of people. That's great. But if LeBron could use that school, once it's up and running, to shame America for not giving every student in America what he gave, if he could actually use his donation to say, I should have never had to do this, that would be what I call real change.
So we're about to run out of time, and I think in reaction to this, and this is not going to help the cause of a lot of my ed reformer friends, but one of the issues or conversations that led me to walk away from Reform at the time that I did was that we were running these schools in Mississippi, and the people who were donating to us were starting to use the success of our schools to argue that you can run schools on less money, because we were getting less money. And for me, that was not what we were about. That's not why we started those schools. We started them to serve the children that we served and potentially show people how to run schools better, but not cheaper. We think there should be 10 times as much money in our school system. And so what you're saying resonates with me. I guess in closing, where do we go from here? So I think about the 1 in 4 people in poverty in Stockton, and I want to end with, I want to get away from the theoretical for a second and give Mayor Tubbs an opportunity, one of our young promising mayors who's facing a lot of challenges at home. What's the future for the people of Stockton? And talk about that 1 in 4 in poverty and what this project can mean to them, and what folks in this room can do to support the work that you're doing.
And I have less than 1 minute to do all that. Okay, so
you could take it. People can get mad at me, but take your time on this one.
I won't do that to you guys. But well, I think a lot of points raised today are really instructive, and just about being careful and being deliberate and being strategic. Like, there's a need to be pragmatic and use resources where they exist, but do so in a way that advances justice and policy and scale, and not just for programs. And I appreciate that, so thank you for that. In terms of the future of Stockton, I mean, my folks are tired of me saying it, but our best days are still yet ahead. We're trending in the right direction, but particularly in the 1 in 4, we're doing a lot of work with reform within the school district, so policy changes and things of that sort. We're also thinking of bringing some high-performing CMOs in as well, as we do the policy change, so the kids who are in 3rd grade today have a good school today, while we do the work that's going to take a decade to make it better for everyone. So, in terms of the conversation today, we're really in this both-and phase, where we're doing what we can today, because people need help today. People need to eat today. People need to pay their bills today. People need to afford rent today. While also understanding that the policy stuff, that stuff that we actually have the most power to do, we could put it on the books, but it's going to take a decade or so for those things to resonate. So in terms of what Stockton looks like in the future, I think you'll continue to see a city of possibility. A city where folks are innovating, where we're trying things, not just basic income, but amazing things around gun violence reduction. We've made CSU tuition free for 90% of our public school students, CSU being our state university system. We're going to figure out something crazy to do around housing and housing affordability. Just continuing to innovate and understand the need to be quick, but also be thoughtful. Again, because the 1 in 4 people can't wait for 10 years for some of the issues they have now, but also being mindful that the best thing we can do is put policies on the books, so when I'm done being mayor, the work continues and sustainable, and it's not contingent on me being a personality for things to get done.
Great. And so, winners take all. We have copies of the books out on the round table.
Free copy. In the spirit of Oprah, free copies.
Free copies. And by the way, Mayor Tubbs is one of the few people Oprah has endorsed directly. So if you're listening, Oprah, he's had your back. No matter what anybody says about it.
Absolutely. Happy to go on your show and announce anything, Oprah, if you're listening.
And I'll give it to Anand to...
I just want to say one just announcement for all of you. We are, my wife, who you're gonna hear from later, she's gonna do a weird, crazy, amazing experience for you downstairs with all those circular chairs you saw. She's an amazing conflict resolution facilitator, and she specializes in bringing people together. And she is helping me organize a series of dinners around this country, off-the-record private dinners in people's communities, where they can actually grapple with some of the questions we've talked about today. What is real change? What is fake change? How do you get from generosity to justice, etc.? If any of you would like to sign up to be hosts for these dinners and take this conversation to your communities, DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open, as is my heart, and I will make it happen.
Goes down in your DMs.
All right, thank you, everybody. Let's give them a round of applause.
No fake change, no fake change, no, no, no. Give them a round of applause, everybody. Thank you, guys. That's real conversation, all right? And we talked about Priya's book, Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. I have a copy of her book.